So Hearthstone's latest expansion, March of the Lich King, is coming out very soon, and I thought it might be worth talking about whether it is worth starting or coming back to Hearthstone in 2022. This video is being made before March of the Lich King launches, so I won't be talking about specific card balance, just the general trends in balance and monetization for the game over the past few years. Feel free to skip ahead to the summary if you just want the TLDR. To give you a very short answer, it's probably worth trying since it's free, but whether or not you'll stick with it in the long term really depends on what your expectations are. Please like and subscribe if you find this video helpful, and let's get into it. I've been playing Hearthstone since release, and the game has changed a lot in some ways and not very much in others. There are a lot of modes, some of which feel like they could be their own games, and I'm going to talk about them all in this video. The original mode is the standard card game, so I'll talk about that first. It's a turn-based card game similar to many other options on the market, where you and your opponent take turns playing cards, and whoever reduces the other player's HP to 0 wins. To get the cards, you have to buy card packs using either real money or in-game gold. There are 3 expansions every year, which each release somewhere between 130 and 150 cards, depending on whether there's a new class released or any changes that they might make. You can use all of these cards in one of 2 modes. Standard, which uses only the most recent 2 years worth of cards, as well as a rotating core set for each class, or Wild, where you can use any card that has ever been released. Whenever people start hearing about card packs, their first thought probably jumps to how much do they cost? Is it fair? Can I get all the cards? And as far as digital card games go, Hearthstone is probably still one of the more expensive ones. Legends of Runeterra and Shadowverse are 2 similar games that I've played, which both give way more than Hearthstone for free when it comes to card packs and free cards and stuff like that. That said, Hearthstone has become more free-to-play friendly as the years have gone on. If I do all of my dailies throughout an expansion, I usually have around 6,000 gold to spend when the next expansion comes out, and that would be equivalent to 60 packs. The cards that most decks are built around are legendary cards, which is the rarest card type, and you're guaranteed to get a legendary card in the first 10 packs of any set, and then every 40 packs after that. So the minimum amount of legendaries that you could get in 60 packs is 2, and every new set has a total of 27 legendary cards. This brings me to the first major point about monetization in Hearthstone. You'll probably have a fairly easy time getting together enough resources to build a good deck, and in fact Blizzard gives out pre-built decks to new players which are usually pretty good and contain a lot of good cards. They also often put out mini-sets which you can purchase for 2,000 in-game gold, which just gives you all of the cards in the set, no RNG required. And these sets also usually contain quite a few good cards. The problem is the main sets. 145 cards with 27 legendaries is a huge number of cards to collect. If you want to play more than one deck, you'll probably have to spend money or be very careful in saving up your dust to craft cards. I'm fortunate enough to have played for a long time and built up a reasonable dust bank, so I can afford to build more than one deck per expansion. But for the vast majority of free-to-play players, it will take years to get to the point where I am now and where you're comfortable with the dust that you have. I also got some pre-order bundles a few expansions back, and honestly, I was just always disappointed. The pre-orders come with either 60 packs or 80 packs, which have a minimum of 2 or 3 legendaries respectively, and they cost $50 and $80 respectively. Paying $80 and getting 3 legendary cards is just miserable. Even if you get lucky and get, say, 7 legendaries, chances are that most of them will be ones that you aren't interested in, as there are 27 total. On the upside, 60 packs is usually enough to get 2 copies of every rare and common in the set, which is the vast majority of cards, but you'll still most likely have to craft your epics and legendaries for the deck which you want, and those are the most expensive cards to craft dust-wise. It always seems a bit ridiculous to me that the price of a AAA game every 3 to 4 months does not even get you anywhere close to having all of the cards. Overall, the game is definitely playable free-to-play if you're happy to play just one or two decks and master them. If you want to play a whole range of decks, it's really impossible free-to-play, at least in Standard, which is the most popular mode. In Wild, it's a bit different. You'd think that it would actually be more expensive to play because you can use absolutely every card, but in reality, it's actually the opposite. There are so many cards that the best strategies in Wild are really very refined, and the best decks often barely change with each new expansion. Most Wild decks change 2 to 4 cards at most with each new expansion. Secret Mage, for example, has been a good deck in Wild since around 2020, and if you crafted that deck back then, you're still making use of a lot of those cards now if you're still playing it, long after they've rotated out in Standard. If you want to play a range of decks as a free-to-play player, Wild is actually far more achievable for this reason. Cards never get rotated out of the format, so any cards that are really good are likely to be staples for years. This means you can get a lot more value out of your dust, as in Standard you spend a lot of dust on cards that will ultimately just rotate out in 2 years and you'll never see or use again, whereas in Wild you're likely to use those cards for a very long time. Anyway, to conclude on monetization, it's perfectly fair for a free-to-play player if you're happy just playing a few decks, but you'll never have anywhere near a full collection. Even if you're happy to pay, the value for money proposition isn't great because legendaries are so rare, and you'll often end up getting a lot of cards that you don't want, and then having to disenchant them to craft what you actually do want, which is much less efficient resource-wise than just getting them from a pack, as when you disenchant a legendary, you only get a quarter of the dust value that you would need to craft a new one. So effectively, you have to disenchant 4 legendaries you don't want to make 1 legendary that you do want. The other big thing to talk about in the Standard card game is game balance. Game balance in the last few years has actually been really good, in my opinion. The developers make buffs and nerfs way more often than they did in the past, and the buffs and nerfs often actually do have the desired effect and change up the meta. The regular edition of mini-sets also shakes up the meta halfway through most expansions. Metas do of course change, and some players prefer some styles of meta over others, like some players prefer aggro versus control, for example. The game as a whole generally leans towards aggro strategies more often than not, but more recent cards like Prince Renathal have slowed the game down a little bit. A full-on control meta is very rare though, so if you're a real lover of control strategies, you're not going to have that be the best deck in the meta very often. Within these metas, the devs are getting very good at listening to feedback and nerfing the strategies that are too strong or frustrating, while buffing those that aren't quite good enough. Overall, I think balance has been in a really good place recently, and the players definitely feel much more heard than they did in the past. Let's move on to some of the other modes. I'll start with Duels since it's the closest to Standard. Here you pick a starting deck of 16 cards from your collection, alongside a unique treasure and hero power for each class offered from a selection of options. It progresses sort of like a roguelike game mode where you get offered various passive effects and treasure cards throughout your run, and you have to choose from a selection of cards to add to your deck after each match. If you've ever played the game in the past, it's basically a PvP version of the dungeon run from Kobolds and Catacombs. Because of these roguelike elements, the RNG is really high in this game mode overall. Getting the right treasures can make and break your run, but overall it's a pretty fun experience. Because you only need a 16-card deck at the start, it's also much more accessible to free-to-play players, and there are plenty of budget starter decks that you can look up online. As far as I know, there aren't any Duels tournaments really, so it's not a super competitive mode, it's more of a for-fun addition to the main game. There are also plenty of solo adventures that have built up over the years. Usually they give a pack or 2 for completion. They're pretty fun, and working through all of them will probably take you some time, but they aren't exactly on most people's radar as major content for the game. There isn't much replay value for them other than a few, like the PvE roguelike experience I previously mentioned in Kobolds and Catacombs, and Witchwood's Monster Hunt. But I think most of the people who are playing those modes regularly now just play Duels instead, as it has all of the same features, but it's updated much more regularly. Finally, in terms of sort of normal card game modes, there's Arena, which requires no cards in your collection at all, but it costs 100 gold or $1.50 to play each time. It's basically a standard card game draft format where you're presented with 3 cards and you have to choose one, and you do this 30 times to build your deck of 30 cards. Honestly, Arena used to be a pretty popular mode, with popular streamers like Kriparian playing it, but nowadays I don't know anyone that plays Arena, to be honest. It still exists in the launcher, but most of the former Arena players seem to have moved over to Battlegrounds instead. So let's talk about Battlegrounds then. Battlegrounds is an auto chess-like mode in Hearthstone. You select a hero from a pool of 2 if you don't have the Battle Pass, or 4 if you do have the Battle Pass at the start of every game. Each hero has a unique hero power which affects how you play the game, and usually has synergy with a certain tribe of units. I think Battlegrounds was the most popular mode in the game for quite some time, and it's definitely still popular, but I'm not sure if it's more popular than Standard anymore. Monetization for it used to be just cosmetics and something called Battleground perks, which you could buy for 1,500 gold, and let you choose from 4 heroes instead of 2 at the start of every game. And most Battleground players were able to gather up this 1,500 gold and pay it at the start of every season so that they could choose from their 4 heroes. Since then, Blizzard moved these Battleground perks over into a Battle Pass system, which includes lots of cosmetics, which most people don't really care about, and the aforementioned Battleground perks. Part of this is that it's no longer possible to buy Battleground perks with gold, as far as I know, which means that you can pay for something which just gives you a better win rate by allowing you a greater choice of heroes. And the player base understandably saw this as blatant pay to win, basically, and didn't really like it, and there was quite a bit of backlash, and the popularity of the mode seems to have dropped somewhat after there. The game mode itself is still pretty fun, and it gets regular changes to the units and the heroes available to use. A wide variety of strategies are usually fairly good, and the best strategies to use does depend on your hero and the types of minions available in that game, as certain tribes are removed from the pool randomly at the start of each game. This really keeps the games feeling fresh, as you don't encounter the exact same comps every single game. So overall, it's a decently fun mode to play for fun if you don't mind the pay-to-win aspects. But as far as I know, a lot of the popularity of it as sort of a competitive experience has really dropped off after this pay-to-win fiasco. The final mode is Mercenaries, and honestly, I don't have too much experience with it. It seems to be the least popular mode by far, and is mostly a PvE mode where you can build a team of mercenaries and have them navigate through a dungeon, collecting rewards along the way. At the end of each run, you can then upgrade your heroes and abilities, ready to move on to the next part of the dungeon or the next run. As I say, I'm not an expert on this one, so I won't go on about it too much. I personally found the gameplay to just be boring and fairly repetitive, so I didn't play it for very long. You don't really play it like a normal card game. You have these you have a set team of 6 mercenaries, and you pretty much always draw all 6 of them. You get to pick which ones you want to play, and you play them out in the same positions, and every game goes pretty similarly. So it just came across to me as very repetitive, and I just didn't get much enjoyment out of it. The main complaint from the community at large seems to be that you have to buy even more packs as well to get the heroes to use in your mercenary teams, and they're completely separate from your normal collection. And then you need to buy even more packs on top of that to get the resources that you need to upgrade the heroes that you have. And most people just find it less fun than normal Hearthstone, so if they're going to spend, they would rather just spend it on the original game instead of Mercenaries. I think Mercenaries kind of suffers from... A lot of the Hearthstone modes suffer from this, but Mercenaries does particularly, which is just sort of the point that why is it in the Hearthstone launcher? It has almost nothing to do with Hearthstone other than some of the characters being the same. It would be like including Heroes of the Storm in the Hearthstone launcher, you know? There's really not much similarity there gameplay wise, and it probably could have been better served just as sort of a separate game. So this video is a bit longer than my usual videos, but I think I can sum it all up fairly concisely. And what I would say is the game is really, really fun, and it gets loads of new content, and the developers listen to the community much more than they used to, balance-wise. But, and it's a big but, the game is very expensive compared to other digital card games. It's still cheaper than your average physical card game, but games like Shadowverse or Legends of Runeterra are much more generous in terms of how much free stuff they give the player and how much you can get with your in-game resources. Despite this, I still keep coming back to Hearthstone because for me it's just the most fun digital card game that I can find, despite all of its flaws. So here's the summary. For the pros, the game is fun and it's updated very regularly. The art's great, the characters are iconic, you can play for free at the highest level, you'll just need to limit your choice of decks. Balance is generally good, and the team is much more responsive than most other card game teams seem to be. The meta changes every 2 to 3 months, which keeps the gameplay nice and fresh, and this is the case in every mode. And there are a lot of different game modes, so you're bound to find at least one that you like. The cons are that the game is very expensive and you get relatively little for spending your money. As I said in the video, sometimes you can spend $80 and only get 3 legendaries, which is just kind of a miserable experience. Monetization for game modes other than Standard and Wild seems to be only getting more and more aggressive as time goes on, like for Battleground with its obvious pay-to-win feature, and then Mercenaries, which seems to just be an attempt to get more money out of the people that have already been playing the game for quite a while. The meta changes very regularly as well, and it might change to a type of meta that you don't like for a few expansions. You know, if you're an aggro lover and suddenly there's a control meta, you might not enjoy the game for a little bit there. Overall, I'd recommend at least giving the game a go if you think it might be for you. It is free after all. Hearthstone has a really passionate community, and I do believe that it's a great game overall. The big drawback is just that it's expensive, and you don't get very much if you actually do decide to spend. For any people who already play Hearthstone and love Hearthstone that are watching this video, I hope it doesn't come across as sort of too negative. I actually really love the game, but when people ask me, should I play Hearthstone, one of the first things they always want to know about is what's the monetization like, because card games are infamous for having quite aggressive monetization, aren't they? And, I'm hoping that this video will provide the information that these people kind of want, and they can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to play the game. Because, as I've said in the video, it's just the most fun card game, in my opinion, digital card game out there. And I've tried all the competitors, and I always end up coming back to Hearthstone because it's just nothing beats it in terms of the IP, in terms of the feeling of not playing the same matchup every single time, the regular changes to the meta, the dev team which feels like it's actually listening to what we want to say, and I have no worries that the game will be dying off anytime soon, like some other games where I'm always kind of a bit, sorry, Legends of Runeterra, but it just seems to be, I'm expecting that to be put on life support any minute now. So all of this is just to say I hope that the video doesn't come across as too negative, but I feel like these are the facts that people really want to know about the game when they're looking for a video like this. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful, so please like and subscribe if you did. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers and hopefully make more videos like this and get a little bit of money for doing so. It's always a nice little bonus. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.